The red on-air sign glowed above the stage as applause rolled through the packed television studio. Bright lights reflected from polished wooden floors, and cameras slowly moved into position, ready to capture another unforgettable night. Thousands watched from the audience, while millions more sat in living rooms across America, expecting another entertaining celebrity interview. No one realized they were about to witness a confrontation that would be talked about for years. At the center of the stage sat the host behind his polished desk. His smile was confident, but behind the scenes, producers whispered nervously through their headsets. Tonight's guests were unlike anyone who had appeared together before. One represented discipline, speed, and philosophy. The other represented confidence, intimidation, and absolute belief in his own abilities. The audience erupted as Bruce Lee walked onto the stage. Dressed in a traditional black Chinese jacket, Bruce moved with calm elegance. Every step looked effortless. He smiled warmly, bowed slightly toward the audience, and took his seat. Seconds later, another introduction echoed through the studio. Steven Seagal entered wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. His posture radiated confidence. His expression suggested he had already decided how the evening would end. The applause for him was respectable, but it was noticeably quieter. The host laughed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this might become one of the most interesting conversations we've ever had." Everyone chuckled. Bruce simply smiled. Steven crossed his arms. For several minutes, everything remained friendly. The host asked Bruce about martial arts philosophy. Bruce answered calmly. "True martial arts teach you to avoid unnecessary conflict." The audience applauded. Steven remained expressionless. The host turned toward him. "Steven, what do you think?" Steven leaned forward. "I think people confuse movies with reality." A few audience members nodded. Bruce continued smiling. The host sensed the growing tension. "So, are you saying movies exaggerate fighting?" Steven shrugged. "Most of them." The host laughed. "Even Bruce's." Steven looked directly at Bruce. "Especially Bruce's." The room instantly became quieter. The cameras zoomed closer. Bruce didn't react. He simply folded his hands. Steven continued. "People watch your films and think you're unbeatable." Bruce nodded politely. "They are entertainment." Steven smiled sarcastically. "Exactly." Another uncomfortable silence followed. The host quickly changed the subject. "So, Bruce, many athletes admire your speed." Bruce answered gently. "Speed means nothing without timing." Steven interrupted before Bruce finished. "I've seen actors move quickly before." The audience shifted uneasily. Bruce remained calm. "I never claimed acting makes someone a fighter." Steven laughed. "But fighting certainly doesn't look like acting." Several audience members gasped. The host raised his hands. "Gentlemen, let's keep this friendly." Steven leaned closer toward Bruce. "I'm just being honest." Bruce looked directly into Steven's eyes. "So am I." The host forced another smile. "What makes a real martial artist?" Bruce answered immediately. "Someone who controls himself before controlling another person." Steven shook his head. "No." Bruce remained silent. Steven continued. "A real fighter dominates." Bruce tilted his head slightly. "Dominating others is easy." Steven raised an eyebrow. Bruce finished. "Dominating your own ego is much harder." The audience exploded into applause. Steven's jaw tightened. He clearly disliked the reaction. For several seconds, he stared at Bruce without speaking. Then he laughed. Not because something was funny. Because he wanted everyone to know he wasn't impressed. "You know what's interesting?" Bruce waited. Stephen pointed toward him. "You've built an entire reputation pretending to fight." The room froze. Even the cameramen stopped, adjusting their equipment. The host blinked. Stephen smiled. "You can't fight." Another pause. "You just act." An audible gasp spread through the audience. One woman covered her mouth. Several people exchanged nervous looks. The producers backstage began shouting through their headsets. One whispered, "Cut to commercial." Another answered, "No, stay with it." The ratings monitor had already begun climbing. Nobody wanted to interrupt what was happening. The host cleared his throat. "Stephen." Bruce gently raised one hand. "It's all right." His voice remained completely relaxed. Stephen expected anger. Instead, Bruce smiled. "You believe that?" Stephen answered instantly. "I know it." Bruce nodded once. "Then tonight may become educational." Laughter echoed across the studio. Stephen didn't laugh. "I've met plenty of actors." Bruce answered quietly. "I've met plenty of people who mistake confidence for ability." The audience applauded again. Stephen leaned forward. "You think you're faster than everyone." Bruce smiled. "I never said that. But people say it. They are free to have opinions." Stephen shook his head. "I'm talking about facts." Bruce nodded. "So am I." Stephen suddenly stood. His chair slid backward across the stage. The audience gasped. Security guards immediately looked toward the producers. The host stood halfway from his chair. "Gentlemen." Stephen ignored him. He pointed directly at Bruce. "If there weren't cameras here." Bruce calmly interrupted. "There aren't." Stephen clenched his fists. Bruce slowly stood. The difference between them became obvious. Stephen looked larger, heavier, physically imposing. Bruce looked relaxed, almost fragile. Yet somehow, the entire audience focused only on him. Neither man blinked. The studio had become completely silent. Bruce stepped forward. Only one step. Nothing aggressive. Nothing threatening. Just enough to stand face to face with Stephen. Their eyes locked. Stephen spoke first. "People think you're unbeatable." Bruce answered softly. "I've never believed that." Stephen frowned. Bruce continued. "Every fighter can lose." The audience listened carefully. Bruce smiled again. "The important question." He paused. "Is what happens before the fight ever begins." Stephen folded his arms. "Enough philosophy." Bruce nodded. "What would you prefer?" Stephen answered without hesitation. "Prove." The audience erupted. Some shouted. Others applauded. The host looked completely overwhelmed. Bruce looked toward him. "May I borrow something?" The host blinked. "My desk." Bruce smiled. "One pencil." Confused, the host handed him a wooden pencil. Bruce held it lightly between two fingers. He extended it toward Stephen. "Take it." Stephen grabbed it. Bruce spoke. "Hold it as tightly as you can." Stephen squeezed with obvious strength. The muscles in his forearm tightened. Bruce gently touched Steven's wrist. Only 2 fingers. Nothing more. Within less than a second, Steven's grip loosened. The pencil slipped. It landed softly on the floor. The audience erupted. Steven immediately picked it up. Again. Bruce nodded. As many times as you wish. Steven squeezed even harder. Bruce repeated the movement. This time even faster. The pencil dropped again. The audience stood and applauded. Steven's face reddened. It was a trick. Bruce smiled. Everything is a trick until you understand it. Steven stepped closer. No. His voice grew louder. Do it without touching me. Bruce nodded. If that is what you want. The producers backstage exchanged worried looks. Security quietly moved closer to the stage. The host whispered into his microphone. I have a feeling. He swallowed. This evening is only beginning. Bruce slowly removed his jacket. He folded it neatly over the chair. No dramatic movements. No anger. Just calm preparation. Steven rolled up his sleeves. The audience collectively leaned forward. Nobody reached for popcorn. Nobody checked the time. Every pair of eyes remained locked on the 2 men. Bruce raised his hands into a relaxed fighting stance. Steven smiled confidently. For an actor, he said, you certainly know how to pose. Bruce answered with complete calm. And for someone who talks so much, he lowered his center of gravity. Let's finally see you move. The studio lights suddenly felt hotter. The air itself seemed heavier. No one breathed. No one blinked. Then Steven took his very first step forward, and the real confrontation finally began. The silence lasted only a heartbeat. Steven Seagal stepped forward with complete confidence, his polished shoes scraping against the studio floor. Every camera immediately zoomed in. The director shouted into his headset. Stay on camera 3, don't miss this. The audience held its breath. Bruce Lee remained motionless. His feet barely shifted. His hands stayed relaxed at chest level. Steven smirked. You still have time to admit that movies made you famous. Bruce answered quietly. And you still have time to discover why they chose me to make them. A wave of laughter rolled through the audience. Steven's smile disappeared. Without warning, he lunged forward. His right hand shot toward Bruce's collar, intending to grab him and throw him off balance. Gasps echoed throughout the studio. Bruce moved. Or rather, he almost didn't. To everyone watching, it looked as if Bruce had vanished by only a few inches. Steven's hand sliced through empty air. Bruce had shifted just enough to stand outside the line of attack. Nothing dramatic. No wasted motion. Just perfect timing. Steven turned immediately. You moved. Bruce nodded. You missed. The audience erupted into applause. Steven attacked again. This time much faster. A straight punch aimed directly at Bruce's chest. Bruce's left hand brushed the punch aside with almost invisible speed. At the same instant, his right fingertips lightly tapped Steven's shoulder. Tab. That was all. Yet Steven stumbled 2 full steps sideways. The audience stood in amazement. What happened? Did he push him? I didn't even see it. The host looked at the nearest monitor. The replay was already running in slow motion. Even slowed down. Bruce's movement was difficult to follow. The audience applauded louder. Steven's expression darkened. It was luck. Bruce smiled. Then let's see how lucky I am. Steven's breathing grew heavier. He circled Bruce. Bruce never circled back. He simply turned with him, always balanced. Always calm. Steven suddenly exploded forward with 3 rapid punches. Left, right, left. Bruce slipped every strike. Each movement was only a few inches. No jumping. No spinning. No unnecessary flourishes. Just economy. The punches passed so close that Bruce's jacket fluttered slightly. Nothing else moved. Steven became more aggressive. He threw a front kick. Bruce angled his hips. The kick missed. Before Steven could recover, Bruce gently touched the inside of his knee. Steven lost his balance and nearly fell. Again. Bruce never struck him. He simply let gravity do the work. The audience roared. Several people rose to their feet. One elderly man shouted, "He's playing with him." Steven glared at Bruce. "You think this is funny?" Bruce answered calmly, "No, I think you're trying too hard." The words hit harder than any punch. Steven charged again, this time with genuine anger. His movements became stronger, but also slower. Bruce recognized it immediately. When emotion leads, Bruce said softly while moving, technique follows behind. Steven swung a wide hook. Bruce ducked beneath it. Steven spun. Bruce was already standing behind him. The audience screamed. Steven turned again. Bruce was gone. Not truly gone. Only standing to his left. The cameras struggled to keep up. The director shouted, "Zoom out, he's moving too fast." Steven's frustration grew. "You keep running." Bruce shook his head. "I'm standing exactly where you choose not to look." Laughter echoed through the studio. Steven rushed once more. This time Bruce finally countered. Not with a punch. Not with a kick. With a single palm. His open hand lightly touched Steven's chest. The contact lasted less than half a second. Steven staggered backward 4 full steps before catching himself. His eyes widened. He hadn't expected any force. The audience exploded. The replay appeared again on the studio screens. Bruce hadn't shoved him. He had simply redirected Steven's own momentum. Even the commentators in the control room stared in disbelief. Steven inhaled deeply. His confidence had begun to crack. The host slowly approached. "Perhaps," he began cautiously. "This demonstration has already proven enough." Steven ignored him. "No." He pointed at Bruce. "You've been avoiding a real fight." Bruce folded his hands. "What is a real fight?" Steven answered instantly. "When someone gets hurt." Bruce's smile faded slightly. "There is your mistake." The audience became quiet again. Bruce continued. "If pain is your definition of victory." He paused. "Then you've misunderstood martial arts." Steven shook his head. "You're afraid to hit me." Bruce looked directly into his eyes. "No, I'm choosing not to." Those words settled over the studio like thunder. Steven's jaw tightened. "Then stop choosing." Before anyone could react, Steven launched his fastest attack of the evening. A spinning strike aimed directly at Bruce's head. The audience screamed. The cameras barely captured the motion. Bruce slipped beneath it with astonishing precision. As Stephen completed the spin, Bruce's fingers gently rested against Stephen's neck. "Not pressing. Simply touching," Bruce whispered. If this were real. Stephen froze. He suddenly realized he could not move without exposing himself completely. Bruce removed his hand and stepped back. The audience erupted into deafening applause. Several people began chanting Bruce's name. Stephen looked around the studio. For the first time that night, he noticed the crowd was no longer watching him. Every eye was fixed on Bruce. His pride refused to accept it. Without warning, Stephen rushed forward once again, this time abandoning every bit of technique. Wild punches, powerful kicks, pure aggression. Bruce's expression became serious. He flowed around every attack like water around rocks. One strike missed. Another. Then another. Each miss increased Stephen's frustration. His breathing became louder. Sweat formed across his forehead. Bruce hadn't landed a single damaging blow. Yet Stephen already looked exhausted. The audience began to understand. Bruce wasn't trying to defeat him. He was teaching him. Stephen refused to learn. With a roar, he threw his strongest punch of the night. Bruce stepped inside the attack. His elbow lightly redirected Stephen's arm. His shoulder rotated. His hip turned. In one seamless motion, Stephen found himself flying over Bruce's body. He crashed onto the padded studio carpet with a heavy thud. The audience leaped to their feet. Some covered their mouths. Others applauded so loudly the host couldn't even speak. Stephen slowly pushed himself up. His suit was covered with dust. His breathing was ragged. Bruce hadn't even broken a sweat. Bruce bowed respectfully. "I don't want to embarrass you." Stephen stared back in silence. His eyes burned with anger. Then he said quietly, "No more demonstrations." He slowly loosened his tie and dropped it onto the floor. "This ends now." Bruce's expression remained calm. "If that's truly what you want." He raised his hands once more. "Then show me your very best." The studio lights reflected in their eyes as they closed the distance again. Everyone in the audience sensed the same thing. The respectful demonstration was over. What came next would be far more intense. The atmosphere inside the television studio had completely changed. What had started as an interview now felt like the final round of a championship fight. Nobody in the audience was sitting anymore. Camera operators had abandoned their usual positions, carefully moving around the stage to capture every possible angle. The producers in the control room had forgotten about commercial breaks. Ratings on the monitor were climbing faster than anyone had ever seen. The host quietly stepped behind his desk. He realized he was no longer leading the show. History, or at least something unforgettable, was unfolding on its own. Steven Seagal slowly removed his suit jacket and folded it across the back of his chair. He rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, flexed his fingers. His confidence had taken several blows, but his pride remained untouched. Bruce Lee stood only a few feet away. Relaxed, balanced. His breathing was so calm that it seemed impossible he had just avoided dozens of attacks. Stephen pointed at him. "No more holding back." Bruce answered with complete honesty. "I haven't attacked you yet." Those words drew another wave of surprised murmurs. Stephen laughed bitterly. "You expect everyone to believe that?" Bruce nodded. "They'll know the difference soon." Stephen lowered his stance. This time there was no anger in his eyes. Only determination. He understood that rushing blindly had failed. If he wanted to win, he needed to think. For several long seconds, neither man moved. The audience watched in complete silence. The tension became almost unbearable. Stephen made the first move. Instead of charging forward, he slowly circled Bruce, searching for an opening. Bruce mirrored him effortlessly. Neither man's eyes left the other. Stephen suddenly feinted with his left shoulder. Bruce didn't react. Stephen immediately followed with a low kick toward Bruce's front leg. Bruce lifted his foot barely an inch. The kick swept beneath him. Before Stephen could recover, Bruce's heel lightly touched the inside of Stephen's ankle. Stephen stumbled. Not enough to fall. Just enough to lose perfect balance. Bruce stepped away again. No strike. No celebration. Just distance. Stephen exhaled sharply. You always stop. Bruce smiled. Because I don't need the next movement. The audience applauded. Stephen's frustration returned. You think mercy makes you superior? Bruce shook his head. No. It gives both of us another chance to think. Stephen answered with action. He exploded forward with surprising speed. A jab. A cross. A hook. A spinning elbow. Each technique flowed into the next with genuine power. The audience gasped repeatedly. It was the fastest combination Stephen had thrown all night. Bruce finally began moving more quickly. His feet barely seemed to touch the floor. Every attack missed by the smallest possible margin. An inch. Half an inch. Sometimes less. The cameras struggled to keep Bruce inside the frame. One operator whispered, "I've lost him." Another answered, "Switch cameras." The director shouted, "No, stay wide." Bruce slipped past another punch. Stephen immediately grabbed for Bruce's sleeve. For the first time, he managed to catch hold of him. The audience erupted. "I got you," Stephen growled. Bruce looked down calmly at the hand gripping his sleeve. "Did you?" Stephen pulled hard, expecting Bruce to resist. Bruce didn't. Instead, he stepped with the pull. Stephen's own strength carried him forward. Bruce turned his hips. Stephen suddenly realized he was no longer pulling Bruce. He was pulling himself. Bruce's shoulder rotated. Stephen's feet left the floor. The audience screamed. Stephen crashed onto one knee. Before he could rise, Bruce's fingertips rested gently against the center of his chest. 1 inch away. "If this were different," Bruce said quietly, "you would already know." Stephen looked down. He understood. Bruce had stopped another finishing strike. Again. Bruce stepped back. "Stand." Stephen rose slowly. His breathing had become noticeably heavier. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto the studio floor. Bruce's breathing remained steady. The contrast became impossible to ignore. The host leaned toward one of the producers. "Has Bruce even been hit?" The producer shook his head. "Not once." Stephen heard those words. His pride took another blow. "I don't need compliments from spectators." Bruce answered. "Neither do I." Stephen's jaw tightened. "You keep acting like a teacher." Bruce nodded. "Because every fight teaches something." Stephen stepped closer. "What has this taught you?" Bruce looked directly into his eyes. "That you're stronger than you believe." Stephen looked surprised. Bruce continued, "But weaker than your ego allows you to admit." Silence. The audience didn't cheer. They simply listened. Stephen clenched both fists. "I don't need philosophy," Bruce answered softly. "You need control." Stephen roared and attacked again. This time he abandoned combinations. Every punch carried enormous force. Every kick was thrown with full commitment. The studio floor echoed beneath each step. Bruce finally countered. His right hand intercepted Stephen's wrist. His left palm guided Stephen's elbow. His shoulder turned. His hips rotated. Everything happened in one fluid motion. Stephen felt his own momentum reverse. Before he understood what was happening, Bruce had locked his arm. Not painfully, perfectly. Stephen tried to pull free. Nothing happened. He tried twisting. Nothing. He tried using brute strength. Bruce remained completely relaxed. The audience watched in amazement. Stephen's muscles strained visibly. Bruce wasn't forcing the lock. He was simply standing. Stephen suddenly realized something terrifying. The harder he struggled, the tighter the position became. Bruce leaned slightly closer. Strength without direction. He whispered, "Creates its own prison." Stephen stopped struggling. Instantly, the pressure disappeared. Bruce released him and stepped away. The audience burst into thunderous applause. Several people were now openly chanting Bruce's name. Stephen ignored them. He stared only at Bruce. His anger had changed. It was no longer fueled by arrogance. Now, it was fueled by desperation. He understood that every exchange had followed the same pattern. Bruce never chased him, never insulted him, never tried to humiliate him. Yet somehow, Stephen kept finding himself defeated. Not by violence, by precision. Stephen inhaled deeply. Then, for the first time all evening, he bowed. Only slightly. Bruce immediately returned the bow. The audience applauded respectfully. The host smiled. Perhaps this is where the evening finally finds peace. Stephen slowly raised his head. No. His voice was calm. Too calm. I've tested his technique. He took one step forward. Now, another step. I want to test his heart. Bruce's expression became serious. Stephen's eyes no longer held the confidence of a man trying to impress a crowd. They held something far more dangerous. A man who had decided that winning mattered more than reputation, more than dignity, more than consequences. The studio suddenly felt colder. Even the audience sensed it. Bruce lowered his center of gravity ever so slightly. For the first time that night, his smile disappeared. He looked directly at Stephen and spoke only one sentence. "If you cross this line," he said quietly, "I will have no choice but to finish this." The audience fell completely silent. No applause. No whispers. No movement. Stephen answered by taking one final step forward. And in that instant, everyone realized the most dangerous moment of the night had finally arrived. The studio had become so quiet that the faint hum of the television lights could be heard. Millions of viewers sat frozen in front of their screens. Nobody changed the channel. Nobody reached for a drink. Every eye was fixed on the two men standing beneath the bright stage lights. Seagal slowly raised his hands. There was no smile, no sarcasm, only determination. Bruce Lee stood opposite him, perfectly balanced, his breathing calm and even. The host whispered into his microphone. "I've hosted hundreds of shows." He swallowed. "I've never seen anything like this." Neither fighter acknowledged him. Their attention belonged entirely to one another. Stephen took a slow step forward. Bruce didn't move. Another step. Still nothing. The distance between them shrank until only a few feet remained. Stephen spoke quietly. "No more demonstrations." Bruce answered. "No more pride." Those 4 words lingered in the air. Then, Stephen exploded forward. His fastest attack of the night erupted without warning. A straight punch. Bruce slipped outside it. A spinning elbow. Bruce ducked beneath it. A side kick. Bruce pivoted just enough for the strike to miss by inches. The audience gasped over and over. Stephen refused to stop. He chained together technique after technique, forcing Bruce backward across the stage. For the first time that evening, Bruce actually gave ground. Several audience members noticed. "He's backing up." Stephen noticed too. His confidence surged. "There," he shouted. "I knew you could blade." Bruce's expression remained peaceful. "I'm not retreating." Stephen launched another heavy kick. Bruce sidestepped. The kick crashed into one of the empty studio chairs. The chair flipped backward and slid across the floor. The audience jumped. Stephen barely looked at it. He continued attacking relentlessly. Punches, elbows, palm strikes, low kicks, high kicks. Every attack carried tremendous power. Bruce defended all of them. Yet something had changed. Instead of ending the exchange quickly, he continued moving, flowing, waiting, watching. The host looked confused. One of the producers leaned toward him. "Why isn't Bruce finishing this?" An elderly martial arts instructor sitting in the front row quietly answered before anyone else could. "Because he's waiting." The producer frowned. Waiting for what? The old man never took his eyes off the stage. For Stephen to stop fighting with anger. Stephen rushed again. Bruce evaded. Again. 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 Minutes passed. Stephen's breathing became heavier with every exchange. Sweat soaked through his white shirt beneath the open jacket. His movements, once explosive, were beginning to slow. Bruce looked exactly the same as when the evening had begun. Calm, relaxed, untouched. Stephen roared and threw one final desperate combination. A jab, a cross, a hook, a spinning back fist, a knee, a front kick. Bruce slipped every attack. His movements resembled flowing water. Nothing collided. Nothing forced. Everything simply flowed. The audience had stopped cheering. Now they watched in complete silence. Even those with no knowledge of martial arts understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. Stephen suddenly grabbed a nearby wooden chair. The audience gasped. The host stood immediately. Stephen. Security took one step forward. Bruce raised one hand without looking away from Stephen. The gesture silently told them to stay back. Stephen held the chair tightly. You've avoided everything. Bruce nodded. Yes. What about this? Stephen swung the chair in a wide arc. Bruce stepped inside the swing before the chair reached full speed. His left hand controlled Stephen's wrist. His right palm pressed gently against Stephen's shoulder. The chair slipped from Stephen's hands. It crashed harmlessly onto the carpet. Before anyone could blink, Bruce had already moved behind him. Stephen froze. Bruce's open palm rested lightly against the center of Stephen's back. The audience understood immediately. One small push, and Stephen would be face first on the stage. Bruce never pushed. Instead, he removed his hand. Stephen slowly turned around. Confusion filled his face. "You had the chance." Bruce nodded. "I did. Why didn't you?" Bruce answered quietly. "Because proving I can hurt you teaches nothing." Silence. The words settled over the studio. Stephen stared at Bruce. His breathing slowed. His shoulders dropped. For the first time all night, his anger disappeared. Bruce stepped closer. Not as an opponent, as a fellow martial artist. "You've spent this entire evening trying to defeat me." Stephen looked away. Bruce continued. "I spent this evening trying to defeat your misunderstanding." The audience remained perfectly silent. Bruce spoke softly enough that everyone leaned forward to hear. "Real martial arts are not about winning arguments." He paused. "They are about ending them without hatred." Stephen looked down at his own hands. Hands that had been clenched into fists all evening. Slowly, they relaxed. "I thought strength meant domination." Bruce smiled gently. "It means responsibility." Another long silence followed. Then Stephen bowed. This time, deeply. Not for the cameras. Not for the audience. Not for television. For Bruce. The audience immediately rose to its feet. Thunderous applause echoed through the studio. Many people wiped tears from their eyes. The host himself was clapping. Bruce returned the bow with equal respect. Neither man spoke for several seconds. Finally, Stephen looked up. "I judged you before I understood you." Bruce smiled. "We've all done that at some point." Stephen extended his hand. Bruce accepted it. The audience erupted again. Camera flashes lit up the studio like lightning. The host walked between them. "Ladies and gentlemen." He looked from one man to the other. "I thought we were going to witness two fighters trying to prove who was better." He smiled. Instead, he looked toward Bruce. He witnessed one man proving what martial arts were always meant to be. Bruce shook his head gently. "No." The host looked surprised. Bruce turned toward Stephen. "We both learned something tonight." Stephen nodded. "I certainly did." Bruce faced the audience one final time. "There will always be someone stronger. There will always be someone faster. There will always be someone younger." He paused. "But the greatest victory." His eyes slowly moved across the silent studio. "Is walking away with your character intact." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the entire studio erupted into the longest standing ovation the show had ever received. Even the camera operators applauded. The producers in the control room stood on their feet. Security guards smiled. The host shook both men's hands. As the credits began to roll, the final image broadcast across millions of television screens was not a knockout. Not a celebration. Not a defeated opponent. It was two martial artists bowing to each other in mutual respect. And that image became far more powerful than any punch ever could.